Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Where's that asshole that puts the logs on the fire? You stay right where you are tonight, man. My name is Gene, and I too am an alcoholic. Well, this morning, if we're going to get serious at all over the weekend, I guess right now would be the best time, you know. We don't like to put a damper on anybody's weekend, but sometimes, you know, you have to be reminded of just how serious our problem is. You know, it's great that we can come up here for a weekend and we can laugh and carouse and tell a few jokes and rehash World War II experiences and shit like that. But we must never forget, you know, and you see this little sign a lot of times around places that says, it's all right to laugh, but never forget that you cried, you know. And the seriousness of our illness should be focused, you know, almost constantly on us. And so this morning for this meeting, I'm going to get a little serious, you know, and maybe not for your good, but for my good, so that I can be reminded, you know, as the book says, I'm here only on a daily reprieve, you know. There are men in this room right now who are going to drink again. We know that. Our experience tells us that. The book tells us that. You, from your own personal experiences, know that. All of us in this room are not finished drinking. Some of us may be drinking now, you know, for all we know. Now, before you, like some of you, are looking at me now as though I just threw a fucking bushel of daggers out there, you know. That isn't an original thought of mine. Don't think that I made this up to scare you. If you've had time to read the book, you'll find what I just said in the book. I believe it's in the 5th chapter, where it says, despite all that we can say, many who are real alcoholics, by every form of self-deception and experimentation, will try to prove themselves the exception to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. Now, we have no way of knowing who these guys are this morning, you know, and it's probably not that important that we try to find out who they are this morning. Just knowing that the possibility exists, you know, should be therapy enough. And how serious is this possibility of drinking again? Well, I'm reminded of a little incident that took place about 15, maybe almost 20 years ago, up in San Francisco. I'm sort of a half-ass sports nut. I follow sports a lot. And one of the favorite places years ago for guys that followed sports to hang out or to eat in, you know, or drink in, was a place called Lefty O'Doul's on Geary Street. Now, Lefty's dead. Now, been dead for about 10 years, and I knew Lefty well. He was a great ball player, you know, and by his own admission, an alcoholic. But an alcoholic who chose, you know, to do nothing about it. But that didn't make him any less of a man. He was just always a gracious host, and he treated me wonderful. And he used to like to hang around guys on AA. And his place got to be sort of an afternoon hangout. They served food in his place, you know, Hofbrau style. And I love to eat that way. I love to go through a line, you know, and say, give me some white meat of turkey and some macaroni salad and enchilada. So all fucked up shit, you know. And a lot of people eat like that. And so it was common, you know, whenever I went into San Francisco, for me right away to go over to Lefty's, because they got all these pictures all around the wall of the old-time ball players. And when any visiting athletic teams were in town, most of the guys sort of operated out of Lefty's. They went down there and drank and chased the chicks on Union Square and stuff like that. And in there were some good AA members, and I'll name some of these guys because they're almost legend in Northern California, and it's possible some of you have heard of them down here. This guy by the name of Frank Brennan, who ran a place called the Seven Seas right on the Barbary Coast, right on the waterfront down there. Old run-down place where he sobered up a lot of new guys in there. It was a hard-nosed sort of a place, and Frank was very close with Lefty, and there was a cop right on the corner. Lefty's is on the corner of Geary and Powell, which is the heart of Union Square in San Francisco. And this cop, he's dead now, Joe Cassidy, was another long-time member of AA and a macho-type guy, you know. And then there was Al Rick, who played the piano in Lefty's. He was about 26 years sober, and then I used to hang out in there, and a few other guys like that. And I always used to look forward to that. Now, just up the street from Lefty's is the Sir Francis Drake Hotel. And I used to get a free ride in the Sir Francis Drake Hotel whenever I went to the city because I sponsored the general manager of the place. So I used to have to come down the hill from the Sir Francis Drake, past the St. Francis Hotel, which is a big presidential type hotel, and then cross the street into Lefty's. And I used to do this, as I say, every time I'd go to San Francisco. I used to teach at the police academy in San Francisco, so I used to have to go in twice a week. And one day I was coming down the hill, going past the St. Francis Hotel, and you all know San Francisco's a big convention town, and there was an obvious convention taking place, some ladies' organization, because a meeting must have had just broken up because the streets in front of the St. Francis were just packed with women with little badges on, you know, and I'm busting my way through, trying to get down to the corner, when all of a sudden somebody called out my name. A woman called out my name, you know, and I turned around and I sort of semi-recognized a lady that I had known many years before. I didn't really know her all that well. She was the wife of a guy that I knew right after the war. He was a construction worker. He was a painter. And he was no close friend, but he was just a guy, you know. He hung out in the same saloon that I hung out in, you know. And he's the kind of a guy that you'd probably sit alongside of many nights and drink, but you each paid for your own drinks, you know. It was no buddy-type relationship. And I had met his wife on a couple of occasions, and she was there for a convention of home economics teachers, school teachers, and she was from Sycamore, Illinois. So I tried to be polite, done the things you say whenever there's visitors in San Francisco, you know. If you have visitors, you become a fucking tour guide for 3 days, you know, and you got to take them to Chinatown, Fisherman's Wharf, and Coit Tower, and they want to see everything, ride the cable cars, and so I'm playing the goddamn game with her, you know. And she says, oh, I've been on all of that stuff. I took a Gray Line tour and all that. She says, one thing I'd really like to do, she says, there's a Japanese tea room. She says, in the hotel on the mezzanine. She said, I'd like to go up there and do that. And that is a big tourist attraction. It's run by Japanese working in their native costumes, and they got the white faces on and the big thing up their ass in the back, and they run around with their feet tied, and they serve them kind of sandwiches, I don't know what the fuck you call it. They don't have the crust on them, you know, and they serve the coffee in a little tiny cup, shit like that. And she wanted to go up there, you know. Well, I looked around to make sure there was nobody around that I knew, you know, like, see me up there. And I took her up there, you know. And obviously the conversation turned to her husband, Walt, you know. I said, how's Walt doing? Not that I was really that much interested, you know, what the fuck him, you know, and I hadn't seen him in years. And she looked at me, and I knew that I had touched something sensitive. Because she said, geez, obviously you didn't know about Walt. And I said, what do you mean, know about what? She said, Walt's dead. I said, the hell he is. And right away I'm doing the mathematics in my head, you know, how old he could have been. And she had said he's been dead for 4 years. And And this placed him at about 32 years old. Now, you don't die when you're 32 years old. People don't die in their 30s. They get killed in their 30s, you know. You die when you're old, you know. And she said, you know, he was dead. And I'm waiting for her to tell me, you know, how, you know, he fell off a fucking ladder or, you know, the building collapsed or something. And she didn't say a word, and we kept eating them friggin' sandwiches, and then finally my curiosity, you know, got the best of me. And I said, how did Walt get killed? And she said, he didn't get killed. She said, I didn't say that. And I said, well, how the hell did he die? And she blushed like hell, you know, and she got all flustered. And she sort of stammered a little bit. She says, well, I guess I could tell you. It's been a long time. And she said, you're not back in Illinois anymore, so what the hell? She says, Duffy, Walt died of cirrhosis of the liver. I said, cirrhosis of the liver? She says, yeah, he was an alcoholic. And I thought about him for a minute, and I said, Jesus, you could have fooled me. I just goes, all I ever saw Walt do was come in after work, you know, with the rest of the guys, throw the lunch bucket up on the bar, have 3 drinks, the house buys one, and then off he'd go, you know. He'd go home. I said, I never saw him have more than 4 drinks in one night in my life. And she says, nobody did. She says, nobody did. She says, but Walt always brought a gallon of wine on the way home, and every night he drank a gallon of wine before he ate dinner, and it finally got to his liver, and she says it killed him. And then I looked at her, I said, Jesus, I'm sorry to hear that. Now, this woman had known nothing about me, had known nothing about when I come to California or what had taken place in my life. And so I said, I sure wish, Louise, I said, that I had known Walt had a problem with booze. And she said, well, what the hell could you have done, you know? And as far as she was concerned, I was still a bricklayer. She had no idea in the world what I was doing. And I said, well, I could have helped him. And she said, how? And I said, well, I'm a member of AA. And I said, I'm an alcoholic. And I said, I haven't had a drink, and I forget what it was at that time, 10, 11 years, something like that. And she looked at me as though I had just told her her fly was open or something like that. And she said, you're a what? And I said, I'm an alcoholic, and I belong to AA. She says, AA? She says, you mean you wouldn't want Walt to join AA? And I said, well, it helped me. She said, but Duff, he wasn't that bad. Now, wait a minute. Now, it's all right that we can laugh at that, but you know, there's a whole ocean of people out there that believe that still think that way. I'm not that bad. You know, well, how fucking bad is dying, you know? And what hurts more is there are people sitting in this room right now that would share that kind of a thought. I'm not as bad as Joe, or I'm not as bad as Keith, or I'm not as bad as Marv, or I never did what Lou did, or I never went to prison, or fuck, I've never had a convulsion or a seizure. And people are always thinking these things, you know. We are all alike. We're the most common stereotype there is. Once you open your mouth, and you say it in good conscience and with some degree of honesty that you're an alcoholic, and you make that admission, that puts you and I all in the same mold. Every one of us is one drink away from possibly. Think of this for a minute. Can you accept the fact that some of us may very well have stopped one drink short of, or one line short of, that the next fucking drink might have been the one that would have kept you from ever coming here? Or the next one might have been the one that put you in hard time for 20 years so that you'd never get here. Or the next one would have baked your fucking head so you never would have had to come here, you know. This possibility exists with every one of us, every one of us. And it may be there waiting for us to take. No matter how good we feel today, no matter how good we feel today. And it's important that we remember that. It's important that we remember that. I got a book for a president once, and you know, and as I said last night, I can't read too well. I can read, but not too well. And so it's really no makes sense to give me a book. But people who don't know me sometimes give me these things, and the fucking book was entitled "Games That Alcoholics Play." It was written by some shrink, a guy by the name of Philip Byrne, you know. And I sort of liked the person who would give it to me, and just sort of out of liking them, I figured, well, I'll try to read it, you know. And I got no further than the first page because it was one of them books about alcoholism, you know, XY equals pH2 minus C and equals Z, you know. Fuck, when I read the title, you know, games that alcoholics play, I thought maybe it was going to introduce 6 new sexual positions or some kind of crap like that. But I was fascinated by the title. The title really got me, Games That Alcoholics Play. Because I had often heard people in AA talking about, you know, the alcoholic plays a game of life and death. He plays Russian roulette. I used to hear them say Russian roulette. And when I first heard it, I didn't know what Russian roulette was. And so I asked around, and I found out, and I guess most of you know, it's a game supposedly that proves your courage somehow, and depending upon how serious you want to play this game, depends on how many bullets you leave in the goddamn revolver. If you got a 6-chambered revolver and you're going to get real serious on this game, you leave 5 bullets in it and have 1 empty chamber, and you sit opposite somebody. And I've often wondered how they decide who goes first. You know? And they spin the chamber. When it stops, they place it to their head and they squeeze the trigger, and if you come up on the empty chamber, you live, and if you don't, you blow your head off, you know. They played that in the picture, The Deer Hunter. They played that game. And I have no argument that the alcoholic who goes out to try to drink again is playing a game like that, you know. And so I was fascinated by that, games that alcoholics play. And I knew that was as true a statement as you can make. Because we do play games, you know, and for the most insane reason. You know, I said before that some of us are probably going to drink again. Well, you know, I don't like to say that. And maybe none of us are. Maybe we're the group of people that are going to stay sober, and it's the group that's meeting in downtown Idlewild this morning that's going to drink again. But let's look at why we would drink again, you know. Well, the book says that we participate. It says, we participate in countless vain attempts trying to prove that we can drink like normal people. This is the greatest obsession of every alcoholic, you know, is to become a normal drinker, a social drinker. Now, I don't think anybody in this room argues with the price it's going to cost any of us in this room to take a drink. The price that you and I pay is no longer measured in dollars, you know. It's measured in self-respect, family, career, vocation, life, anything, you know. We have to put the whole ball of wax up on the line when we say, give me a drink, give me a drink. Well, that's bad enough. But the thing that's really insane is that in this attempt to become a normal drinker, placing all of this risk upon us, there's a very established fact that makes it all so hilarious. There's not an alcoholic who walks the face of this earth that could tolerate for more than 30 seconds the conditions surrounding normal drinking. Or have you forgot how normal drinkers drink? Watch them. They leave half of a drink on the bar and go home. They say the most fucked up things you'll ever hear. No thanks, I've had enough. Two's my limit. Let's eat. They put the cap back on the bottle. That's how normal people drink. And just by your obvious laughter, you know, you realize how ridiculous that would be to become a normal drinker. And yet, some of us are going to forfeit our lives in an attempt to become a normal drinker. And we're told about that in the book, if you've gotten that far. You know, it says, many of us persisted in an insane illusion that somehow, some way, someday, you can once more drink like so-called normal people. And if you were even given that opportunity, you'd cast it aside 30 seconds later and say, fuck this, because you couldn't handle it. You couldn't handle it. I don't know how you feel about it. I was taught, and I teach, if that's the word, the people I sponsor, and especially the attitude that I assume, not only in my AA work, but in my own private work with alcoholics on a professional basis. I make an assumption just as soon as somebody asks me for help, that if this guy drinks again, he's going to die. I don't care what in the hell he thinks or what anybody else thinks. If you say, would you help me, my assumption is that I better, because if you take one more drink, you're going to die. Now, we hear a cliche that makes reference to that many times in AA, and it holds true right here. And I know you've heard it, but let's remind ourselves of it here this morning. You know, we know that every one of us in this room certainly has another opportunity to get drunk. There is no argument over that. I imagine everybody in this room's got a couple of bucks in his pocket right now. We're clean, obviously, sober. We don't look like we're going to be a pain in the ass any place. So we would probably all be welcome in any saloon in Idlewild or down the hill into Palm Desert or Rancho Mirage or wherever. We all know that we can go out and get drunk again. But there's no one in this room or any other room like this, any place, that knows whether or not he or she has got another recovery left. You may have already had your last drunk. The next time you drink, it might be your life. If you're lucky. If you're lucky, it might be your life. Death is the best thing in the world that can happen to a practicing alcoholic. Let me explain that. Many years ago, I was at a discussion-type meeting, and we were discussing the word insanity. And we were all sitting around at tables. You've been to discussion meetings, about 12 of us. And no, nobody was showing any big interest in it. And there was a woman there by the name of Dorothy Rhoda, who was a longtime member of AA, had known her for years, wonderful, dedicated, still a very dedicated member of AA. And I remember well because she was sitting there knitting. And that always burns my ass, you know. It really does. It's, you know, and I don't give a fuck what the women say. They say, oh, well, this helps me concentrate. The human mind cannot occupy two thoughts at the same time. Science will tell you that. So it's impossible to knit one pearl, too, and be paying attention to what the speaker is saying. But I didn't want to argue with Dottie, but as it came around for her to open her mouth, say, make a comment, she said something that thousands of other people have said, I myself have said in describing insanity many, many times and never thought too much of it, thought it was the right answer. But that night it was to be different. That night I was to experience, I guess, what the book refers sometimes to as a moment of clarity or a moment of true understanding. Because I realized right after she said what she was going to say, how wrong she was and how wrong I had always been in making that same statement. Because I see her right now. She was sitting there knitting. And she said, well, insanity to me, you know, would be for me to drink again because I know what's going to happen to me, you know. And then they went out to the next person. But right then and there, I knew how wrong she was. There's no mortal human being who walks the face of this earth who has the power to predict the outcome of any future event, let alone an alcoholic who is about to put into his or her system the #1 mood-altering agent known to man. You do not know what the hell is going to happen to you the next time you drink. You just think you know. You know, the cemeteries are full of guys who thought they knew what was going to happen, you know. Well, if I drink again, I'll have to go back into treatment. That's what they thought. The next time they drank, they convulsed and swallowed their tongue and died. They didn't have to go to treatment, you know. And other people say, well, if I drink again, I'll probably lose my job, but fuck it, I'll get another job. So they go out and get drink, and they get arrested, and they participate in a criminal activity, and they do 25 years someplace. The proof of that statement that I've made is the statement that all alcoholics always make, usually coming off of a drunk. I wouldn't have drank if I had known that was going to happen. I wouldn't have said that if I hadn't been drinking. Unable to predict the outcome of any future event. So thinking about that, I thought about the title of that game. Games that alcoholics play. Russian roulette. Well, at that time, I used to be quite chummy with a man that owned the casino, Bill Harrah, up in Tahoe, and well, he's very well known. And Bill, in case you never knew it, was an admitted alcoholic. Bill lived on anti-abuse, and he was probably the closest friend to AA that we have in Northern California and Nevada, but he never went to AA, never became part of AA. He financed a 12-step house year after year out there on Virginia Street in Reno. He was always quick to give guys a one-shot chance at a job in the casino when they'd come out of a joint or whatever, you know. They always started out as janitors and stuff. And he was a hell of a friend of AA. And Bill died. But when I heard about this roulette, you know, I wanted to be dramatic. You know, alcoholics can't do fucking things normal, you know, like got to do it big, you know. I figured, Jesus, if I had a big roulette wheel, you know, I'd know just what I'd do. So I asked Bill, well, I didn't actually ask him, I asked Jimmy Ring, who was his right-hand man. I said, Jimmy, could you give me an old roulette wheel? Because they have a lot of old shit up there. He says, I'd be glad to. He says, but it's illegal for you to take it across the state line. He says, we can't ship it from Nevada. And he says, we certainly are not going to take any chances of you bringing it through midnight or all that. Just can't give you one. So I had a guy make me one. Make me a great big roulette wheel. Now I want you to imagine a big roulette wheel up here in front of me. And instead of having numbers on it, I put words. Now I'll tell you some of the words I had on there. Words like convulsions, seizures, DTs, hospitalization, death, insanity, 502s, and a lot of other things. Now, if these things are familiar to you, then you're certainly in the right place. Because those things are not too familiar to normal drinkers and social drinkers, you know. Now, let me tell you how I painted it. And I got the idea for painting it, ironically, down here. Years ago, I was romancing a young lady that lived in Palm Desert, who ran the Erewhon Gardens Hotel down there. I used to come down here about every weekend and play house. And sometimes we'd go to AA meetings over in that clubhouse in Palm Desert, which is a nice place to go to meetings. And one afternoon, a young Marine came in there, young baby-faced kid, you know, from 29 Palms. And he had just received his dishonorable discharge. And we were talking about, the subject was the now. And it got to this kid's term, and he says, the now. He says, let me tell you about the now. He said, I've just been dishonorably discharged, and my father has told me not to come home. He says, I don't know where the hell I'm going to get a job, and I got about $41 to my life. He says, life to me is a shit sandwich. And he says, every hour I take a bite out of it. And I knew just what he meant. I knew exactly what he meant. And when I thought of the life of the practicing alcoholic, me and you were drinking, that's exactly what it was, a shit sandwich. And we kept taking bite after bite out of it and getting a mouthful of shit. So when I got ready to paint this roulette wheel, I was going to paint it with all the colors like on roulette wheels, but I said, no, that wouldn't be true. And so I had an old wino that, well, I still got this guy hangs around my place. He's got no home, no place to go, and I don't know if he's alcoholic or not, but he's illiterate. And he'd die, you know, if I let him out on the street. So he stays at my place, and I tell him he's the landscaper and all that shit, you know. And that's good enough for him. And he can't really do anything, you know. He don't know how, he can't even sweep right. You know, he'll get it in a pile, and he tries to put it on the thing, and he pushes it sideways, and he smiles, you know. And he's just one-eyed Benny is what we call him, but I don't know, he's good for me, you know, he's good for me, and that's all that counts. So I figured that And I told Benny, I said, Benny, I want you to paint this wheel for me. And he said, you know, all lines. And he said, what color? I said, you go down to the shop and you use any fucking color you want. Right? And you know how it is in the paint shop. You got about 50 cans of paint. Each one has a little bit in it. And that's exactly what I wanted Benny to do. He went down and he used them all, and it looked like shit. It looked like somebody spilt it. But he thought it was great, but it looked like a shit sandwich. That's just what it looked like. Then I put all these words on it, and the guy whose wife works in a lamp factory up there in Santa Rosa stole a bunch of little brass things for me, and I put all of the things around the edge to make this roulette wheel. And that's what me and you really have to play. There really is a roulette wheel, you know. It's not the one that's made by me, but there is a roulette wheel somewhere in our life as alcoholics that we have a daily choice as to whether to play that game and spin that wheel or just leave it alone. It's almost the same as when we drank socially, you know. There's no big change in what happens in the mechanics of drinking. The thing that has changed with us is why we drink. That's why we're alcoholics, you know. Because getting a drink is no big deal. It's probably one of the easiest things that you'll ever do in your life, to get a drink. The normal procedure in getting a drink is if you go into a bar, you know, and you lay a couple of bucks down and you say, give me a double shot of VO and water. And all that happens, there doesn't even have to be any communication from the bartender. He reaches under the bar and gets a 7-ounce glass, and with his left hand and with his right hand, he scoops up a couple of ice cubes, throws them in, goes to the speed rack, gets the VO bottle out, splashes 2 ounces into it, puts it under the spigot, fills it up with water, puts one of them little sticks in there and sticks it around a bit, piece of paper underneath it, puts it in front of you, takes your money, rings it up, and puts the change down. That's all that happens. That's all that happens. And that's all that happens with the alcoholic. We do the same thing. But I'm going to tell you something I bet you never noticed. You remember how after he does all the mechanics and makes the drink and gets the piece of paper, puts it in front of you, takes your money, why do they always say good luck? What? When you get a pizza, do they say good luck? Or you get an ice cream cone, do they say good luck? But you get a fucking drink, good luck. Because there's somewhere we must know that, hey, you know, you might need a little good luck. This fucker's going to blow your head, you know, or some shit like that. But what happens with me and you, we order the drink as an alcoholic, and after we pay for it with the cash, we raise the glass, you know, get ready to take it, and the bartender says, hold it! You haven't paid yet for that. Well, I just gave you $1.50. What the fuck are you talking about? No, you said you was an alcoholic. So that means you accept the fact that you can't control what you're about to put into your mouth. Well, you think about that for a second. You say, son of a bitch, that's right. Well, fuck him, you know. And you drink it. Well, the price for drinking it is spinning the wheel. You gotta go up and spin that fucking wheel, thinking that you know what's gonna happen. And you're saying, well, fuck the bartender. So what if I have a convulsion? I've had 1,000,000 of them. And the next time you don't have a convulsion, you have a blackout. And you go for 9 fucking days not knowing what in the hell happened to you. Blackouts are bad news, you know. I've been here for 34 years and I've never heard anybody say anything good about a blackout. You know, I've never heard anybody say, Jesus, I had a blackout for 6 days and when I came to, I found out I had been umpiring Little League games in Pakistan or some fucking thing like that. It's always been some horrible thing, you know, has taken place, you know. And you have to take them into consideration. You see, we talk about fear can't keep you sober. I have no argument with that. I know that. I know that, and I believe it. But it can be a hell of an incentive, I'll tell you that. I have some strong fears about drinking. Probably the strongest fear that I have about drinking would be that if I chose to drink again, that it's quite possible that I could experience something during that drunk, that once I came back to reality, what I experienced in that drunk would take away from me any desire to ever want to be sober again, or to take any desire to ever want to walk in reality again amongst you guys. And some of you know or should know exactly what I'm talking about, because there's some horrible things out there yet that happen to people like you and I. And I can only speak for myself. I couldn't handle some of those things. I know I couldn't handle them. I'd want to die. And I'm too much of a coward, and I have too much of a love for life to kill myself. So I'd have to live. But I'd have to try to live drunk. And the life of a practicing alcoholic has been proven over and over again to be a life worse than death. The proof of that is around you all the time. How many guys do you hear when they're drunk say, I wish to fucking Christ I was dead? How many of us have leaped from bridges? And I jumped off the Veterans Memorial Bridge in St. Louis, East St. Louis, Illinois, to St. Louis, Missouri. I jumped off a Nordock up in Marquette, Michigan, almost 400 fucking feet, you know. But live. The alcoholics don't die that way. They don't die that fucking way. And because life had become so fucking unbearable, you know. Because of my persistence in wanting to drink. The desire to drink was always stronger than the desire not to drink. And the more you play that game, the more you get involved in what they say in the book as we are convinced that we are in the grips of a progressive illness, that over any period of time it'll get worse, never better. So what happens is each time you spin that wheel, each time you go back to drinking, once you land on something, so you land on convulsion, all right, you've been there, so you take the pins out, so that the next time you spin it, you're going to shoot right by that and land on something else. Then you take those pins out, and it's obvious that as long as you keep spinning and taking the pins out, eventually you're going to land on everything there, the longer you exist. That's why you'd be lucky to die first. You could commit murder. You know, I just was doing this talk here the other day, and there was a bunch of women, mostly women in this group. It was a daytime group, and God damn, they got all excited. What do you mean, murder? Well, I know there's some other fellows in this room that have had some kind of institutional experience that I share, and they'll tell you the same thing I'll tell you. Murder is the easiest of all crimes to commit. It doesn't take any sense, doesn't take any preparation, doesn't take any planning. It can be done at a moment's notice, and it can be done anywhere with anybody. Easiest crime in the world to commit. Most people who are under capital punishment now, sitting them out on death rows, are not hardcore criminal type. Most of them are first and only time offenders. Crimes of rage and passion. Committed a crime, you know, when not in full control of their faculty. Smart crooks and smart criminals don't put themselves in them kind of situations. You know, robbers never go into a place with a gun because they know then the sentence is different, you know. And they let somebody else do the fucking wasting, you know, and they stand back and plan it, you know. It's just the fucking idiots like us that get caught in it. Let me show you how easy it is to murder, and how easy it is for any of you in this room to be a murderer. No, it's probably difficult in this room. For a moment, I forgot where we were. We're in California. Don't have AAs like this in California. Alcoholics, there's a higher class of alcoholic in California. But in other parts of the country, you're going to find this hard to believe, but believe me, it's the truth. There are actually alcoholic guys who hit their wives with fists. Believe it, I know that's hard for you to understand. Really? In Chicago, they beat on them and everything. Oh, horrible thing. Tell me something. How hard do you think you'd have to hit your wife in the mouth if she was standing right here, knock her over, And this be that sharp-cornered coffee table you got in your living room. And have her fall against that, strike her temple right on the corner, which would kill her just like that. How hard do you have to hit her? You've all probably hit them a lot harder than that, but that's all it takes. How about some of these bitch women that throw things at you? You know, especially if you're pouring their juice down the sink, and they're in the other room calling you every rotten cocksucker in the fucking world, and they pick up a pair of scissors and throw them the length of the room at you. Gets you right in the fucking jug, and you're dead. Yet she could stand up in this room right now, from now until the rest of her life, throwing a pair of scissors and wouldn't be able to hit that wall. But one time in a million she did. And that's all it takes to become a murderer. That's all it takes. And it happens over and over again, almost on a daily basis, all over the country. Accidental homicide, accidental homicide. Read about it every fucking day. And those are the kind of people, can't you see the husband saying that as he's looking down at his wife dead? Jesus, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to do that. It's a little late then, you know, when it's over. And all of those things can take place. I got a hell of a fear of blackouts. Because I know that's when these things can happen that can take away from me them desires, you know. I guess everybody in this room is familiar with blackouts. How many have had blackouts in this room? Oh, wait a minute, that couldn't be that many. Blackouts, I said, not passing out. Come on. You know what a blackout is? Let's get it straight for my own benefit. I can hardly believe this. A blackout is a period of time that goes by in your life, generally measured in days, during which time you will have no recall, but you will be mobile, and you will be able to appear to be functioning almost 90% normal. And you or no one else around you will be aware that you're walking around in actually a semi-hypnotic state. That's a blackout. Now, how many of you have done that? You're getting yourselves in trouble. Passing out is the same thing, only it's measured in hours. But during that time, you are immobile. All right, do you guys who raise your hands for blackout, do you realize what I can say to you? See, you have admitted that there's a period of time that has gone by in your life that you have no account over. But you're willing to accept the fact that almost anything you can conceive in your mind could have taken place without your knowledge. Now, if this was a group of women, I'd be cute and funny, and I'd make a funny thing. I'd say, "Is that what you believe, Alice?" And she'd say, "Yeah, I had a blackout." And I said, "You ever fuck me?" And they look up and they say, "God, no." How do you know? How do you know? I said, "You just told me there's a period of time." And all the guys laugh like hell, then, you know. And then I give it to them right in the ball. What do you think I could have said to you? What do you think I could have said to any one of you guys that put up your hand? And you couldn't deny it. Couldn't deny it. And I know those things take place. You know they take place. I woke up years ago in Macon, Georgia. And believe me, I don't know, well, I know some AAs there now, but I never knew anybody from Macon, Georgia in my life. As a matter of fact, I don't like Georgia, you know. I could see of no reason for me ever even going to Georgia. And I guess most of you have experienced this at one time or another, a fucking humiliating time, you know, when you wake up in them strange fucking rooms and you look out the window hoping to see something that you recognize, the Golden Gate Bridge or the Statue of Liberty or some fucking thing, you know. You look out there and you don't see nothing. And you run over to that little desk in the room and maybe there's some stationery in there. And you open up the desk and ain't nothing in there. You look for matches, you know. Maybe I can find out where I have no fucking matches. Well, then the only thing you can do is call down to that desk. And then that's when you begin to get concerned and your ego gets all fucked up because you're about to talk to somebody whom you're never going to see, whom you never have seen, and who don't give a fuck who you are. But you can't bear to say, can you tell me where I am? Yeah, Mr. Duffy. Yeah. You're on that land making Georgia. Oh, fuck you. How long have I been? Yeah, man, you've been here 4 days. And you sit there on the end of the bed, trying to figure out how. Why? Then all of a sudden you begin to piece things, and you can remember 9 days ago, Illinois Central Railroad Station, Chicago. Yeah, that's right. Where the hell was I going? What the hell was I fucking doing there, you know? Had $32, yeah, I had $32. And you see your pants laying across the top of the dresser. 32, I know. See how much I get left? I get a half a pint up here, I get my fucking head straightened out. Now I'll be able to put this together. And you go over to your pants and you lift them up and you put your hand in a pocket to get the $32 and you pull out $782. And it's almost 30 years later, and you're in Idlewild, California, day before the Super Bowl in 1986, and you still don't know what the hell you did that many years ago, somewhere between Chicago, Illinois, and Macon, Georgia, to warrant you having $782. Every time I've told this incident, I expect right after the meeting somebody to stand up with the gold badge, a Fed, you know, and say, fuck, I've been looking for you for 32 years. You're the guy that in 1950, going through Biloxi, Mississippi, you busted into a gas station and beat a guy to death with a tire iron and stole $782. Or in 1953, you were going through Greenville, Tennessee. You busted into a little mom and pop grocery store and you strangled a little old lady and took $782 out of a little can she had behind the register. Or you busted into a liquor store in Biloxi, Mississippi, and you stabbed the guy to death and took $780. What the fuck could I say? I'd have to sit there with the same dumb look you had on your face when I said, you know what I could have said to you. Sure, I'd deny it, just like you'd deny it. Down in my gut, I don't know. I don't know. And you live with those things for the rest of your life. Sure, the steps help you just to a point. Sure, I've been willing to make amends. I became willing to make amends after the statute of limitations ran out. But I stayed plenty fucking low until they did, I'll tell you that. But you know, I'm an alcoholic. And we rationalize ourselves out of all these situations anyhow, you know. I can get out of that just like that, just as quick as I got in it. Because after a lot of thinking, I'm pretty sure I know what really happened. Because I've never been a violent guy. And that was so long ago. Those were in the days when I had a 28-inch waist and a full head of hair and loved to fuck. And I can assume that I was probably hitchhiking to Florida to go down there for the winter harness racing season. And I must have been standing out there on Highway 51, hitchhiking. And a starlet from Hollywood was on her way home to Macon, Georgia, to see her mother. And she came flying by in a big pink Cadillac convertible and spotted Mr. Serenity standing there. And she hit them goddamn brakes, you know, and backpacked in and said, honey, hop in, you know. And I got in. And she said, I'm going to Macon, Georgia. And I said, fine. And we drove all that afternoon and couldn't quite make it to Macon, Georgia. And she says, sweetie, she says, we got to stop and stay overnight, and I want you to sleep with me. I said, I can't do that. I'm a Catholic. She said, I'll give you $782 if you will. And that's where I figured I got the money. That's where I figured I got the money. Now, if you believe that, you know, you'd believe that the most popular book in Ethiopia is the Scarsdale Diet, you know. And that's not true. A little bit alcoholic, just a little bit alcoholic is not as bad as. Why do we even say that? Why do we even say that? I believe that people who say that, who are trying to, and I'm going to say something, you know, that's going to be a little controversial. But just hear me out, please. I've been around here long enough to have some kind of credentials, and I'm just going to tell you how I feel, and it has nothing to do with you personally. I think the biggest danger that all alcoholics face is trying to make themselves different in AA, trying to be a different kind of an alcoholic. I'm not as bad as an alcoholic, or I'm the worst alcoholic. Because the signal I get from that is you're trying to tell me it's going to be harder for you to get sober and stay sober than me. We first started seeing this a lot here lately about 10 years ago, when a lot of you younger people started out with the dual addiction saying, my name is Fred and I'm an addict and an alcoholic. The only message that I get from that is that you're trying to tell me that you're different. Every one of us is an addict. We have always been addicts. The drugs of your choice today are no different than the drugs of our choice in our time. The names are different, that's all. You have at your disposal a big, wider selection of drugs and hallucinogenics and amphetamines than we had 20 years ago, but what LSD does to you, bennies and opiates of other kinds did for us. So the drug aspect is no different today than it was in 1935. Both of our founders were dually addicted. The third pamphlet that was ever printed in AA was a sort of a maroon type pamphlet that says sedatives, stimulants, and the alcoholic. The problem has always been addiction. Addiction. So if you're just trying to level with us and let us know you got two problems, that's all right. But if you're sitting there trying to tell me you're different, or that this is going to be more difficult for you than most alcoholics, I don't buy that crap. Because this program, as if you remember last night what I said, was designed for all kinds of people. who was seeking a new way of life. That's why AA works for the addict, because you take the first step of this program and set it aside. The next 11 steps can apply to anything, because they are all about living, how to live. You can obviously, which has been done by countless other programs, take the first step and substitute the problem word for any problem you want, whether it be Child Abuse Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Wife Beaters Anonymous. They've all used them. And that's the only place they change. Many of you have been to NA meetings, and you hear the same damn steps in NA. I tried Fats Anonymous. That don't work too good for me. I still eat, you know. But it's the same damn steps, you know. And so don't complicate sobriety. And I think that's the biggest danger that many of us have, is complicating sobriety and diluting AA. Now, I said last night in a little conversation that I too am, somebody said he was a rebel, and I believe it was you. Well, I'm a rebel too. A rebel in the sense that AA is my life. I have no argument with that. I know fucking well that I'd at least be dead, you know, if this had never happened to me. This is the greatest possible thing this is better than going to heaven, if you know what I mean. If I went to heaven when I died, that would be the second best thing that happened to me in my life. That's how much I love this program. And I literally, and I say it only with expression, I probably don't mean it, I would die to protect this program. I would die to protect it. Because I know that what it does, besides just stopping drinking, besides, it really makes men out of men, this program. And it really does make ladies out of ladies. And it does makes an individual that becomes a force, who by his or her own example, you know, sets an example of what a utopian life could be like. You've heard it said many times, what if the whole world lived by our steps? You know, what a fantastic place it would be. What if we could take our steps and apply them to cancer? Suppose that to remove or arrest a tumor, you just had to come to 2 or 3 meetings a week and eat them fucking cookies and go to H&I and cancer wards and things like that and handle your illness. You know, it'd be fantastic. You know. So I love this thing. You know, it's my life. And I'm scared to death to lose it. I'm scared to death to lose it. And I live with a fear that it could be taken away from me if I drank again. An example, you know, and I say this against nobody's lifestyle in here, you know, I'm not gay, you know, and some people are gay. I've grown as a result of this program where I can associate with gays and talk with them, and they don't really upset me as much as they used to be, but by choice, I chose another lifestyle. And I have a fear that maybe the next time I get drunk, I may get thrown in the Cook County Jail, which is called the Bridewell out there in California Street in Chicago. Guy's nodding his head there. He knows exactly what the hell I'm talking about. And I'll tell you, that's not Disneyland out there. Tough, mean. And I'd like to tell you about a night that I spent there one night. I was around about the 9th day of a 15, you know, and so I had a little seniority in a tank, and which got me up in the front, you know. He must have changed that fucking tape again. Right? Easy, you can do better than that. Go ahead, get some coffee, what the hell. But Chicago's a great convention town. Let me tell you what happens with scumbags like me in Chicago, you know? You who've been on the street know you've got to do almost anything to survive, and steal, rob, mug. Our days we called it jack rolling, nowadays they call it mug. Well, you have to pick out your spot in your area to do your thing in, and my spot used to be the LaSalle Street Station, right down here in Van Buren in LaSalle. And it's easy to get into this kind of an operation in Chicago because of all the conventions that take place there. And how you usually do it, it's usually on a Friday afternoon or a Thursday night is when you have to start. There's a lot of empty stores, or there was in those days, right across from the entrance to the LaSalle Street station. And I used to stand over there in the darkness of one of them stores, watching the trains roll in from all over the Midwest, you know, with the convention guys on them. And you can spot them a mile away. You got a big badge on, a fucking hat with a red, white, and blue. And to find out if they're really farmers, they always got white socks. You look for the guys with the white socks, you know, because they're fucking Okies, you know. They don't know what the hell it's talking about. And here they are coming to the big city for the first time in their life, you know. You know that the guys back home have chipped in, give them a little stake, and the guy's been saving a few dimes. So they're all holding a few bucks. You know that. And they get into the city, and they want to do them things that they've been hearing about all their life. They want to see B-girls, and they want to go see Deep Throat, and all this other shit. And so they hit the spots, you know, and of course, the bars take their money till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then they become pains in the ass. And they begin to get thrown out of these fancy places. Oh, get the hell out of here. We don't want you around here. But that isn't why he come to Chicago. He come there because he wants to unload, you know. He wants to tell somebody what a prick he's married to and what a lousy fucking job he's got back there in Lone Oak, Idaho, you know. And nobody will listen to him down there in that loop in the fancy part. He wants to go someplace where they'll listen. And I don't know if it's a hidden force or what, but they just sort of migrate right towards West Madison Street. That's Chicago Skid Row, and I don't care who's ever been on any kind of a Skid Row. That's the roughest in the goddamn world. That's 48 square fucking blocks of hell, and I mean terror. I hear comedians every now and then make jokes about Skid Row, and I don't know where to get their material. I lived there for 17 months, and I didn't smile or giggle or laugh 1 second in that 17 months. I think I drank more in those 17 months from terror than I did alcoholic, because I was scared to death to close my fucking eyes, you know, lest something horrible would happen to me. And that's where these people sort of migrate to, because they know down there they can get somebody to listen to them. Now the cops in Chicago, because tourism is a big business, are very protectorate of the convention guys, and they watch them like hawks so that they don't get hurt. Now, I want you to ask yourself if this could happen in your life, you being one of them little convention guys. You go in there and get yourself blasted, and now it's about 4 o'clock in the morning, and you got to get out of that joint. And you can't walk, and you're stumbling all over fucking hell, and you don't know where you are. And scumbags like me are just waiting outside for you to come out, put you in an alley, and do what we have to do. Well, the cops know that. So the black and whites are up and down that fucking street making it tough for you, and it's tough to do, because the cop is going to protect you. So here comes the little drunk out of a place like Rothschild's or some other goddamn flea bag, and stumbling all over hell. And contrary to what you and I used to think, cops are pretty good guys, you know. They're really not out to hurt too many of us, to protect us sometimes more than they ought to hurt. And they spot this asshole. And they know full well that there are pricks like me just waiting to get our hands on them. So they pull up alongside of our friend, and they say, hey, what hotel are you in? We better take you home, get you off of the street before you get killed down here. And then that little obnoxious little cocksucker that the drunks become says, fuck you! You pig son of a bitch. Mind your own goddamn. I can take care of myself. Get out of here. And the cops try to plead with him, you know. No way. So finally one cop says to the other, well, we can't leave him here on the street or he'd be dead in an hour. Let's run him out to the Bridewell and we'll throw him into the tank. Won't even write him up, you know. We'll give him a kick out at 6 o'clock and fuck, there'll be no record at all. 6 o'clock he'll be sick, but at least he'll know where his hotel is and we'll give him cab fare and he can get the fuck out of here. Now that's sort of the decent thing to do. And they do that a lot. They do that a lot. Now the tanks in Chicago at that time were 4. The maximum is 180 to a tank. They can take 720 guys. Now they can't take any more than that, because there's a federal law about overcrowding in the drunk tanks. And the reason they fill them up every night is because the county jail is in Cook County. And the state has to pay Cook County $5 a head daily for everybody that's in the drunk tank. So obviously the best thing to do is to fill them up every night. And then they take the count at about 11:30 at night of that day and get five, and then they throw half of them out at 12:30 because that's another day, you know. And it's just a racket, and somebody down the line is getting pissed off for that. Well, as I said, I was sitting up there in the front of the cell with my seniority, you know, getting a little air, and the blue lights are on now, and you can hardly see, and you hear a little commotion down below, and here the two cops coming in with our little friend, draped like that, you know, raising holy hell, pissed off, fucked up, you know. And the cops are arguing with the jailer, because the jailer says the tanks are full. I can't put them in. There's got no place for them. Take them over to the Racine Street station, or take them out here, keep them in the back of the car, but you can't put them in here. And the guys are pleading with him. Come on, we can't let him die. And then one cop says, fuck, he's only going to be in here for a few hours. Put him over in the North Tier. Put him over in one of them felony cells over there. Just let him sleep it off over there. Only 8 guys in the cell. You know, I don't have to tell you, you know. Well, that was my first experience, and it scared the shit out of me. Because I heard that fucking yell that only you guys know that have been around when that takes place, you know. It's a yell for help, and it's a yell for wishing you were dead, I guess. It's combined. And I didn't know what the fuck it was. And there was an old-timer in there with me. I said, what in the hell was that? He says, look across to the North Tier. And over the North Tier, there was 3 guys, and they were going to work on this fucking drunk. And they were, you want to call it rape, that's a clean word, but it was more fucking vulgar than that, you know. And that helpless little guy was as helpless as many of you and I have been at times. Too drunk to stand up, too drunk to fight, just totally helpless. And that's what I say are some of the things, you know, that if they took place in my life, I could never come sober again. I could never walk out of the bridewell as obviously that guy did the next morning. I don't think I could ever raise my head up again because I'd be scared to death that I'd be looking right into the eyes of some guy that just fucked me. And I couldn't take that. I couldn't take that. And I know it takes place daily, and you know it takes place daily. So. And I know it can happen to me. There was a time when I would have said, no, I'm too fucking tough for that, I'm too smart for that, but you're not tough and you're not smart when you're helplessly drunk, you know. And there's nothing you can do about it, nothing you can do about it. Or on a more cleaner note, you know, I have a fear of backing a car out of a garage and crushing one of my grandson's skull. How could I ever live again with that, you know? What kind of a family would I have, you know? Who would look at me? And those are all of the potentials. And a lot of them happen as a result of them blackouts, you know? Anything can happen in a blackout. Last night, I was talking to a kid out here, I don't know, I guess he's still there, yeah. When you said that, you know, it takes time. It don't take time to murder or anything like that. I go down to Soledad once a year to do a meeting on their anniversary down there. And there's a kid down there by the name of Evans, Charles Evans, a black kid, who's in there for murder. Now, of course, everybody in the fucking joint, you know, is in on a bum rap. They'll all tell you that. And they don't belong in there, but that's okay. And any of you that have been in H&I know how it is when you go into an institution, you get shook down, and they usually assign a host inmate to you, if it's an occasion, anyhow, and he takes you around, shows you where the can is and everything, and how to get to the mess hall, the meeting hall. Well, Charlie always is the guy that meets me, because we've gotten to know each other now, and I correspond with him. And listen to him, you know. Charlie, he heard me talk down there one night, and he came up to me after the meeting, and he says, I want to tell you a story. He says, I'm not looking for a cop-out, and I don't need any help. He said, but I want to tell somebody who I think will believe me because it's the truth. He says, I know no judge or no jury would even be allowed to hear this, and he says, I've told it to the warden and other people, but they just laugh. But he says, I think you'd believe it. He says, Duff, I'm in here for murder one. Murder one. He says, and I have no doubt that I committed the murder. He says, but as far as I know, I have never been in Salinas, California in my life. Yet all of a sudden, he says, I came to, and I was in custody of the Monterey County Jail. And there was blood all over my clothes, all over my hands, and I had a pair of scissors with my fingerprints on them. And he says, I was being held for murder. He said, when I saw the picture of the girl that I was supposed to be murdered, he says, I swore I had never seen her before in my life. And he says, if it had meant my life, I could never have found the motel where the crime was committed. He says, but I know I did. He says, the last thing I can remember, he says, I was in National City. You know where that is? That's south of San Diego. I was south of San Diego on a hell of a drunk. All right, I don't know how many hours or how many days it would take you to get to from National City to Salinas. But you could get there in a blackout, not knowing you. How long does it take to pick up some kind of a fucking bimbo? How long does it take to get into a beef with a broad? How long does it take in a fucking moment of that insane alcoholic rage that we all know? How long does it take to pick up a fucking pair of scissors, you know? Now, I believe that guy. I believe that he never meant to commit a murder, and I believe that he doesn't know he committed the murder, you know. But there's nothing that can be done about that, you know. He's going to be there for an awful, awful long time. And so when you talk about time, you know, it doesn't take a lot of time. Blackout that I had when I used to race harness horses years ago, and when I was a lot thinner than I am now. And let me tell you how normal you can act in a blackout and how time enters into it. This whole thing came about all of a sudden one morning. It was about 10:30, and I was walking through the stable area of the racetrack at Washington Park, Illinois. And I was on my way across the parking lot to the outside gate to a place called the Shot Put. It was a little bar where most of the drivers and trainers hung out and drank. And obviously that's where I was going to go, because that was my pattern. Work the horses out in the morning till about 10, get a half-ass out of a breakfast, then run over and drink till about 2, 3 in the afternoon, go back to the tack room and sleep and go to the paddock about 7 o'clock at night. As I was going through the stable area, I went past the racing secretary's office. It was a trailer. And he hollered out the window to me, hey, Duff, as long as you're here, stop by and get your check for last night. And I stopped and I thought for a minute, what the fuck's he talking about? And you know, when you're using and you're drinking, you're always on top of money. You always know you got money coming. And I assure you, if I thought I had any money coming, I would have known it. And I said, Charlie, I got no money coming from last night. And I had thought, you know, and I had been in both parts of the Daily Double, but had finished way out of the money, and I had come about 7th in the 4th race and about 8th in the 6th race. And I said, you must have made a mistake. And he says, I got no time for fucking around. He says, get in here and get your check. He says, you come 3rd in the 9th race. 3rd in the 9th race? I didn't even remember being in the 9th race. You know? I didn't even remember going out on the track. Now, this may not sound like a big deal to you, because you're saying, well, what the fuck, a mile track? What do you do, a mile in 2 minutes, 2:05, 2:10, something like that? Anybody can forget for a couple of seconds. Well, there's more to a race, obviously, than just the running of the race. There's about a 15-minute period before the race when you bring the horse out on the track. You got to parade him twice in front of the grandstand so the bettors can see him. You got to take him to the first turn, you know, put the head check on and tie his tongue down. Then wheel him to the back stretch, go to the gate and go off with the gate, and then go off with the race in front of the grandstand. That takes about 15 minutes. Then comes the actual race, for 2 minutes we'll say. And then if you finish in the money, you got to go to the first turn, bring your horse to a gallop, remove the horse check, take off the tongue tie, you got to signal to the stewards on top of the grandstand whether you got any bitch about the race or a claim about the race. And because you're going to get a purse, because you won, before you can take your horse back to the stable, Illinois law says you had to take him back to the paddock and run him through the test to make sure he hasn't been fucked with, you know. And in Illinois, the drug test for horses is the urine test, not the saliva. And any of you that have been around horses know that getting a horse that's tense, you know, from a race to To pass urine is a tough job sometimes. It can take you a fucking hour to do it, you know. You whistle your goddamn brains off. And sometimes you're lucky enough to pass urine. So we'll take the smallest part. We'll say maybe it took you 15 minutes. So then you've got a half an hour. A half an hour in which you were normal enough and good enough to take a 1,100-pound animal out on a track with 9 other horses, 9 other drivers, and because Washington Park at that time was a half-mile track and you're in a mile race, that means you went past the grandstand twice with 20,000 people screaming at the top of their fucking lungs. You're good enough to finish third, and you don't even know you were there. You don't even know you were there. All you know is that they've got a picture of you, and any of you who've been around racing now know that that's a law. Every horse is photographed in a race. That's why you see every horse has to pass the finish line. Even if he stumbles in the beginning of the race and is 95 lengths behind, he's got to come to the goddamn wire. That's because he has to be photographed. And look at this next time you're at a track, and you'll see that camera is right in front of the tote board. It's right in front of the part of the tote board that gives the time of night, the date, the day of the week, the month, and the year. All of the fucking information is right there. So when the picture comes out, it shows you sitting in the sulky with your horse with all the information right behind it. Factual, visual proof that you were in that race, and you can't deny it. And yet you don't know it. Yet you don't know it. I don't know how long that blackout was. When did it start? Did it start after the 6th race and last clear through the night until 10:30 when I found myself walking across there? Or did it just last for the half hour? Did it start at the 6th race and end at the 10th race? I don't know. But a half hour. What can you do in a half hour? How long does it take to murder? How long does it take to rape? How long does it take to do anything? Anything. And so I know that the possibility of all of these horrible things that I talk about and you think about are there if I choose to drink. Now, we have 1,001 defenses against that drink, you know. Now, with the exception of calling upon God as a higher power, as far as I'm concerned, the most infallible defense that I have against taking that drink is a decision, you know. AA is nothing but a bunch of decisions, daily decisions, minute decisions, hourly decisions, and yearly decisions. Every morning, regardless of where I am, whether it was up in Calistoga or as it was this morning in Idlewild in a bunk bed in the infirmary. Ain't that something? That's where I'm sleeping. That shows you what they think about me around here. Put me in a fucking hospital. Sick sons of bitches, you know. And the first conscious thought that comes to my mind, as quick as I could put it in my mind, is I have to make a decision. Now, the decision is the only decision I have to really make today, because the only problem I've got in my life is to drink. If I take a drink, then I'm going to bring in a whole lot of problems. But until I drink, I've only got one real problem in my life. So I asked God, as I understand him, this morning, to help me get through today without taking a drink. And because I'm sharing a room with Marv there, who was kind enough to come and pick me up at the airport, I asked God to help him through today, you know, without taking a drink. Now, the process that'll take place today to help me keep from taking a drink is rather simple. I had breakfast with a bunch of wonderful people who weren't drinking. Here we are right now. I'm safe now. We'll go on through the rest of this day in the company of each other, and I probably won't drink there. I understand there's a little poker game tonight. I'll probably be in that, and then I'll get through that without taking it. So chances are going to be pretty good that I won't take a drink today. And what makes that important, and so important, is that tomorrow morning when I wake up and it comes time to make the decision again, as a result of having made the decision I made this morning, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow morning full of fear, full of remorse and resentments and frustrations and despair. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow sweating like a sick pig. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow morning trying to throw up and I can't throw up, and I'm not going to be waking there and shaking like a leaf in the fall wind, you know. I'm not going to be thinking about, Jesus, am I going to convulse today or go into DTs or a seizure? Will I swallow my tongue by Thursday? or what the fuck did I do yesterday, where was I last night. None of them things will be in that bunk with me tomorrow. So I'll probably make the same decision tomorrow that I made this morning. And as a result of those decisions, all of a sudden you're 5 days sober. And then once you're 5 days sober, it's easy, because all you have to do for the next 5 days is the same thing you did for the previous 5. Now you're 10, so then you do 10 on 10 and then 20 on 20. And all of a sudden some son of a bitch puts a cake in your hand and kisses you. And it's a year and you don't really know what the hell happened. And then you too realize that it's no big deal. It's no big deal, you know. I did exactly what they said. I read that book. I came to these meetings and I didn't drink. And as a result of that, like I said last night, I became part of the greatest adventure in my life, you know. Thank you very much for having me.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.